Welcome everyone to episode 16 of the We Can Do Better conversations. Today we're going to be talking with Sesil Pir, Benjamin Warsinske, and Victor Cora on the topic of virtuousness, role modeling, and leadership. What do we mean by virtuousness? Why is it important? What is the impact for us individually as leaders, on our teams, on the people we serve? And so to get us started, I'm going to invite Sesil in because she's done some research on this topic to give us a little bit of context about what do we really mean by virtuousness.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for having us. So the way we think about virtuousness inside of an organization is a way of association. It's how individuals and organizations sort of aspire to become when they're at their best. And there are some conditions that we think about when it comes to virtuousness. So for example, there's an element of flourishing in there, which sort of supports our way of finding purpose or our way of realizing our purpose. It could be either or, but it's related to purpose. There is a state of vitality, which is sort of related to resilience and our growing capacity and ability sort of diverge back from adversity. And by the way, those two elements, flourishing and vitality, together create what we call thriving organizations, just in parentheses. But then there's a third element, which is ennoblement. That's a sense of pride that people carry when they have virtuousness. So that's sort of the broader definition, if you will.
Thank you, Sesil, for the context there. And as we think about virtuousness and leadership and the importance of role modeling, Benjamin, what comes to mind for you in terms of your experience, your stories, and how you serve your clients?
Well, what I found really interesting was the sense of pride that was linked to virtuousness. And when I think of that, I think of the brands that I absolutely love to interact with, and that I'm proud to interact with them or have them be part of my incorporated in my lifestyle, like Starbucks, for example, or maybe like Apple Computer. Those kind of like you have that pride around that, and I think that pride within just using the brand as a customer also translates internally to the employees having pride working at the company. And if maybe that is true, or maybe it's not true, maybe it's just it's only true to the customers, but not internally, which I think happens a lot in organizations where they put on a kind of a face or a mask, but internally they're not operating the same as they are promising to their customers.
Love that, Benjamin. Victor, how about you in terms of this aspirational nature of virtuousness and what you see?
In IT for about 26 years, my teams, because we were kind of like, we were noticed only when things were bad. So we had to prop ourselves up and act like a family. So in terms of that, I saw it there. I also saw it in the Air Force when I was in the Air Force for about 4 years. Everything we did was about the mission. Everything was tied to the mission. Even if you were, I don't know, sweeping the floor in your shop, you were saving lives. And I've carried that throughout my career. And then when I joined SOAR with my wife and the CEO of SOAR, Malay, she has those core values as well, and she's trying to implement that into other organizations. So I love the fact that I love your description, Sesil. I've never seen it described that way. But that's kind of like what we're trying to do, right? Like have employees live those core values, which are aspirational most of the time, right? Because they come from the top. And I feel like that creates ownership of your own work too. Like you're proud of that product, right? Like Benjamin said, you're proud of making that Apple laptop or whatever. And that comes through that way.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I love your reflection, Victor. Linking virtuous behaviors and organizational behavior, I think, is an uncomfortable idea for organizations, right? But it's untrue. I don't know why we have this concept that like virtuousness or morality doesn't go along with empiricism, because it's completely untrue. As you said, in a military setting, for example, it's lived day to day. And similar to Benjamin's example, Starbucks is a company that I am very familiar with, and they do indeed live it day to day. Their employees embrace it, and therefore as a customer, you get to experience it. So it's not untrue, but we have this concept that the two doesn't go together for some reason. I don't know why we believe that.
Yeah, I feel it's been my experience that it's still there. The defined core values and all that, they're still there. You're just not managing them, right?
Right.
Because you could work in an organization that's toxic. Well, those core values are there too, right? It's just that nobody sat down and went like, okay, we don't want to do that. We want to do this. So I feel like they're there anyway.
I think it takes the leaders of the organization to actually believe in the core values and to want to live out the core values in order for the employees to embrace them and understand them and see if those core values are part of them personally as well. I think a lot of times core values are kind of seen as like kind of fluff. We're like, hey, we're gonna come up with these things, put them on the wall, and then we're done. But that's not really how they work. Like they have to be beliefs that are part of the organization, and they have to be lived out every single day in order for them to manifest and become real and become part of that organization.
It's so true, Benjamin, and they are measurable. A lot of the times when I go into an organization, or when we go into an organization as a team, people ask us, like, can we measure this? Can we measure virtuousness, for example? Or if we are talking about caring, can we measure caring? Anything that you can't measure, I tell them, you shouldn't even put any effort into. Yes, you can. In other words, yes, you can measure. It's about defining it in the first place. But it tells us so much about our perspective, because if you look into like psychology research, if you're in the field of psychology, in the past 50 years, 99% of the research that's been done, and I'm quoting this scientifically speaking, has focused on negative phenomena. We don't study positive behaviors anyway. So we don't know the value of carrying a value inside of an organization, right? We don't know the value of carrying a virtuousness. So it's just not part of our perspective, and therefore it's not part of the conversation. But that doesn't mean it's not there or it doesn't have an impact. It certainly does.
Love that. And so what you're all helping me to kind of think about is what those organizations that are doing this well are kind of aspiring to what they're becoming virtuousness. What's different for them versus the ones that aren't yet there? And this notion that came up before of control versus caring. Sort of we came up into this conditioning of control and sort of adopted or had no choice but to adopt and kind of comply with that environment and that way of being. And now we're trying to kind of help people see that caring not only is possible, but it's actually a way to get to better. And so talk a little bit about that in terms of what's different for those companies that are able to live the values, as Benjamin was talking about, practice them. I would say, it's not just a word on the wall kind of thing, but a practice and something that is felt. I think the element of being able to, whatever your culture is what people feel, right? It's sort of like that notion. And so a little bit on that and this notion of how do we get to a mindset and a way of being around caring that's not just, ethereal, wishy-washy for some people, but something that is accepted, lived, and helps us create better.
Wow, lots of questions in there. Benjamin, can I put the spotlight on you? Because I'm curious if you get to observe while you're doing Lego work with clients, the difference when they're sort of looking out for one another or trying to do the right thing versus when they aren't. Are you able to observe that? I bet you are.
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think back to a couple different sessions. So one of the activities I do is having teams build a model of an aspect of a core value. So if their core value is trust, like all 6 team members, for example, at a table would build one aspect of trust as a model, and then they would share their aspect, and the idea would be that they're all different, so that we can get a really kind of broad perspective of what this core value trust really means to the team. And so I think when you first start those activities, people are kind of looking out and trying to make sure that they're different, or they're kind of staying surface level almost. And then the more that we do those activities and exercises, people then really kind of go a lot deeper and get a lot more of themselves comes through in the activity, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it makes great sense. I'm curious because usually when you go into an organization, well, after a while, with some experience, but you're able to detect the kind of behaviors and you know immediately what's going on. And I wondered if like you can take a subset of that in a facilitated workshop setting and actually, had that experience. It sounds like
Well, the funny thing about Lego Serious Play is that before I facilitate the session, people have their way of thinking or their perspectives on certain things, and as soon as we go into the session and they actually start building with Lego and they start telling the story of that model that they just constructed, it's usually a lot different. Their answers are a lot more in depth and a lot more carefully constructed. They have a lot more metaphors around the model that they built and everything that the model contains as far as information. And what's fascinating is that outside of the session, they are kind of like have this kind of surface level perspective, and they don't really want to go too deep. But when you get into this state of flow or this state of play, all those walls and guards kind of come down, and that's, I think, the magic that brings out the real kind of insights that they're not sharing otherwise.
It's cool, really cool.
And so I get curious about how do we create that state of flow and play every day then, right? So do we have to have you come in every day, Benjamin, to do these sessions, or Victor or Sesil? So how do we create that outside, right?
Yeah.
Your IT teams and
Victor, go ahead, Victor, and I'll go. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say to Benjamin, I love the name of that workshop, the Legacy. Is that what you say? Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like for us, it's just to share with all of you the workshops that we do and team alignment and things like that. Most of the time, we just want to make sure that the team understands that the supervisor, he's or she's a human being too, right? Like sometimes they come in with a mood, but you don't know if his wife just got cancer. Sometimes they don't even share that with you. And the main thing that we're trying to establish is just get to know each other and understand why this person acts that way and the other person acts that way. And then it's kind of like a family, right? You live with their bad traits because there's so many good ones. And they provide a lot of positives to the group.
I would echo that for sure. Brian, you asked if there are differences between the two organizations. I would say there are. I think where we do see sort of a caring environment or virtuousness sort of come to life, there may be 2 or 3 attributes that sort of jump out very fast. One is moral goodness. Like, people, especially those in positions of authority, are doing the things that are sort of right? So they do what's good, what's right, and what's worthy of sort of cultivation. But, I said right in quotes because, what's good, what's right, I think is really up for conversation, right? Like philosophically, you could really discuss for hours what they mean. So there's good for the sake of good, like loving is good because it's something that keeps on giving, right? But then there's good for obtaining something, like you can do good so that you can have money or you can have prestige. And I think in these organizations, people can sort of differentiate and they just try to do the right thing, right? Like it sounds simple, but that's what we observe. The second thing is there's usually a human element, which is what Victor was saying. Like, there are good days, there are bad days, but at the end of the day, it's part of the condition, right? And so people try to bring sort of their best forward. They try to sort of exercise a bit of self-control. And, it's not they can differentiate between where there's heart and where there's not heart, for example. And then the last bit probably is around sort of social betterment. Like that would be the third thing I mentioned. Like when people do things, they do it beyond the self-interest with an understanding that this is going to do good for the broader organization. And so there's a benefit to, you know, a number of people without an expectation of reciprocity or reward. Those are probably the things that I would say we see happen differently inside of a caring organization versus a control environment.
Love that. And so what I'm hearing you say, what you all were sharing, what helps me think about language I use around creating your conditions, right? So Sesil just gave us some conditions or things we would see in caring environments or virtuous organizations. And so if we're still on the journey to get there, what are some things we can do to build, right? So how do you get to caring without things like acceptance? And, you know, someone's having a bad day or someone's not their best self. How do you get to caring when the mindset is around authoritarianism or control and doing, you know, what you're asked to do and just stay inside your box kind of thing? And so the expectations are different, sort of like we were talking about before. The spoken word is, the values on the wall say this, but the reality is this. How do we get to the caring? What are some sort of building blocks to help us get there? Such as play, maybe.
Yeah, play. I love the idea of play. So I'm not going to answer your question, but let me just tiptoe on what you said. Again, I think there's a assumption out there that these concepts don't go hand in hand with productivity, right? So the typical sort of definition of great organizations would emphasize wealth generation and competitive strategy and like strength of leadership. I just want to highlight that this doesn't stand in opposition of that in any way. It sort of extends beyond, right? So there is also social caring and social impact and ethics. So I just want to put it out there. I'm not answering your question, Brian, but they're not in opposition of one another. Yeah.
I wanted to comment that I'm probably not answering your question either.
So we all go wrong.
Yeah, right. But maybe to add, maybe we'll figure out how to answer it directly after this. But I feel also that it sounds counter, but I feel like having good documentation and good policy and standards in organizations in terms of the way of doing just regular things, day-to-day things, also frees you to play. Right? Like if there are no standards in an organization, you still have to worry about doing the work every day, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that might seem like control, but it's not, right? It's just, this is how you build a laptop, right? This is how you set up an account. You still need those procedures and what am I allowed to do? What are my boundaries? Now, hopefully those boundaries are wide enough to give ourselves some room to play, but you still need those guardrails, I guess. So I just want to make sure that people understand that we're not talking about no control. I mean, there's control for quality, right, a product, but then there's also, if you have knowledge workers especially, you have to give them room to play and to imagine and to make things better.
There's this notion that, you know, by saying control versus caring, we're not saying either or, right? It's just a spectrum, right? And so what Sesil and Victor are pointing us to, it's, yeah, we got to have some level of consistency and expectations and processes and controls to create the space for us to navigate and bring our brilliance and the environment in which to do that. It's not absent control or structure, and it's not like all kind of, you know, caring and disregarding what we need to get done, because that doesn't help anybody, right? So there's a mix of that, and the uniqueness of what that may look like for organizations may be a place to explore too. And that's the whole thing about creating conditions. What does that look like? I use the term framework with flexibility. Everything is a framework with flexibility, and everything's got a spectrum for me. Yeah. Right? So one size fits all never works for me. I don't care what we're talking about. And so I think that's the same with organizations. We're not trying to give them a formula, but we're trying to help create a mindset of, like Sesil, you were talking about, it's like, this isn't contrary to what we're trying to achieve as organizations, the goals of, better profits and better impact and all that. It's actually supportive of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree. What Victor said really resonates with me. I think there is a management element, which I usually put that on sort of this axis, and then there's the leadership, right? And where there's the intersection is beauty. It is difficult to get there, but it is possible at the same time. I think you mentioned role modeling at the very beginning, Brian. Role modeling is a great way of sort of, making this happen, because there's a lot of character related to role modeling. And so it's really about deciding, who you want to be and how you want to become in the way you do the work itself. And that's probably the sort of the sweet spot. And if I were to sort of challenge, though, the way we think about role modeling, there are a lot of challenges I can put out there too. We pay a lot of attention to what people achieve as an end result, right? So role modeling becomes for us an attribute of success or competence, but we don't ever question the pre-existing conditions, right? Because there's also sort of role aspirant attributes, if you will, right? So, how does someone exercise judgment, whether they exercise integrity or how they exercise integrity, and the level of accountability. We don't pay attention to any of that. We just care about the end result. So for us, it's very easy to say he or she is a role model because they're in a particular role, or they've made a ton of money, or they've sold 1 million copies of a book, right? But how they have evolved to get there, we don't have a conversation on. And I think that matters equally much. Anyway, I can go philosophically on this for a long time.
Oh, I love it. I mean, you made me think of so many bad examples and good examples, and they both end up in the same place. So it does matter how you get there.
Right? It does, totally.
We know rich people that they will run over their grandmother to get there, right? And they got there. But that's not necessarily what you want to role model. So the result, you can't just look at the result. You explained that so beautifully. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Benjamin, what are your thoughts as we kind of now get into role modeling and maybe what it is, right? And what it's not?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said around, do what I, or watch that quote about watch what I do, not what I say, or
do what I say, not what I do,
say,
right?
not what I do. I think it's kind of, you have to really kind of be careful who you kind of latch onto to follow as a role model. So I think there's, I guess, kind of like warning around who you kind of pay attention to. So like for me, I try to kind of pay attention to a broad amount of different perspectives, just to kind of round everything out and kind of make my own decisions from a role modeling perspective. But I think that also goes back to within like an organization, if people are looking up to you and are looking to you as a role model, then you really, and you're aware of that, then you really need to kind of be more transparent, I guess, or be willing to share things that maybe you wouldn't share in a otherwise situation, so that people can, who are coming up or who are kind of looking to you as a role model, can learn from you, and being able to share those lessons, I think is important.
I love the invitation you just kind of put out there, and I took it as such to look at the relationship between role modeling and self-awareness, right? And so we're talking about leadership. As a leader, if you are kind of doing your thing and not aware of the impact on other people, and what Sesil was talking about, the end result, and that I call that the what versus the how. For me, leadership is the how. Right? The what, it's almost a distinction between management and execution is the what, and the how is leadership. And so now we're starting to get to qualities of, and why should leaders have support, whether it's coaching or mentoring or different things to help them see differently, because they're going to need to see themselves. Hey, how am I showing up? Well, it may be different than you think you are, because you see through the lens that you see through. But if I'm working with the three of you, you may all see things that I don't see about myself, And some of them may be, you know, like we're talking about, some of them may be okay, they may be good, some of them may not be so much in terms of the impact. So that self-awareness and expanding your perspective to understand yourself in a way, and then also being able to notice what the impact when you're having a conversation with someone, noticing things like body language, tone, whether people are avoiding you, whether people are willing to proactively come to you because you've created the space for them to do that. And so I think we just now I see starting to see some direct connections to how people be as leaders in this virtuousness and this aspirational way of becoming, and some things they can do to help themselves. And one of those things is this noticing your self-awareness, being attentive to it, and continually checking in with it and saying, hey, where's the learning opportunity here for me? Oh, you know, kind of what am I noticing? And getting connected to your feelings, what you're noticing about yourself. And then also with regard to others too is, hey, how might I better understand how I'm showing up for other people? Am I even asking? And if I am, great, what kind of feedback's coming up? What patterns am I noticing? Or if I'm not, how might I do that more often?
Yeah. I really love where this conversation is going, Brian, where Benjamin started and where you're taking it, because role models, consciously or unconsciously, kind of inform our environment, right? So we know this. Our individual identities are individual when there's only one of us, but once we become part of a system, our identity development is really not individualistic. It becomes more socially constructed. So, you know, you have what's happening factually to your body, but then there is also a lot of the self, which is a reflection of what you're seeing. So our behaviors inside of a system, like charitable giving, or, you know, tax, for example, tax evasion, or corporate culture, our behaviors in these sort of systemic places is very influenced by who we perceive to be leaders. We look to them for sort of giving us cues, but also what we believe others are doing. So what we believe others' behavior to be, and especially if those behaviors are rewarded, we think that's the right thing to do. So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with us being a part of a group, I guess. And it's hard to sort of keep that on top of mind because we are all humans, and so we falter on a day-to-day basis. That's totally okay. But I think trying to have the self-awareness to live more intentionally and more consciously is a great first step. I fully agree with that.
That's what is amazing. You describe culture so well. I think what, you know, you really did. You paint a picture. You're a very good educator, I guess. But I feel like one of the things that you described is we have this tool called we use something called predictive index, and you know, you get an assessment of your behavior. But the thing that they do is break out your behavior in terms of how you see yourself and how you see yourself in the organization. And most of the time, the 4 things like DISC or whatever, they have something similar. Most of the time they move. So your dominance moves a little bit to the right or to the left in the bell curve, depending on where you think you have to be. So what you described put that picture in my mind right away.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that. I would love to see your index, Victor. That sounds very interesting. Here's something else I'll share with you. When we were doing research, I just got curious, like, as to why there's so much filtering, with adult vision, if you will. And so I dug up virtuousness studies with children, and it so happens that we experience virtuousness more as children. And, when you think about it, it makes sense. Like, I don't have children, but I have nieces, and we have foster care that we look up over the weekends. And they are so direct. Like, if they don't like something, they'll say it. I don't like it, or I don't like this person.
That's right.
But I think as we become adults, our sort of daily anxieties really form our specific stories, and then they start to shape how we show up, And sometimes we become too self-identified with certain stories, right? So it's very interesting how that comes to be.
Yeah, no, I love that. One of the things that, I'm sorry, Brian, really quick, I want to tell this to Cecil, well, to all of it, is I was also thinking when you were describing earlier about how you behave in these environments, is that it's very important for us to be centered and to have our own mission statement for our lives, and then try to align it with whatever the organization is doing. Because if it doesn't align, you probably shouldn't be there, right?
Clear.
You know, I think, I mean, at least Brian, I know him kind of well right now, and me, we couldn't work for an organization that just says, let's make as much money as we can, and we don't care like who mess over, right? So we couldn't work there. It's just, that's not the way we are. So you have to be aware of that, and I feel like you should like write it out. This is who I am. This is my mission. These are my values. And then hopefully there won't be that much divergence, I guess. It is between who you are and who you think you have to be in that group.
You've got me thinking, Victor, in terms of the conversation we had in the Humans First community recently. And so think about the concept of communities or organizations where people self-identify want to be part of, right? Because there's alignment to meaning and purpose there, personal meaning with organizational meaning, that connection. And so what you're pointing us to in terms of having that clarity of personal mission, what matters to us, right? You know, I work with people looking to find jobs or maybe transition into jobs, and it's like, it's not at the job, it's you. Start with you, right? What matters to you? And then we'll go, what are the attributes of what you'd like to have in the job? What are the things, how would you like to contribute? Then let's go find what that looks like. But the mindset is typically, oh, I want to be this title, or I want to be this. And it's like, okay, but let's start with, you know, sort of this notion of what resonates with you, what matters to you, what is your area maybe of high performance and high energy. And then we can kind of describe sort of roles that might align to that. And so when, you're always sharing too in terms of different assessments and whatnot, this framework that I've been trained with and with people acuity is around the 3 ways that we can look at ourselves, that we should see ourselves. So we see ourselves through our lens, how others see us, and then how we think they see us, right? And so the notion of, that's the awareness piece is, there's the reality of how we see ourselves, there's the reality of how others see us, or others see us, and then there's how we think they see us. And so that perception piece, right? And so that's interesting to kind of think of those different dimensions in terms of awareness again, and virtuousness, and inviting data and kind of reflecting on, how am I with regard to where I'm aspiring to be and who I'm becoming, and how might I celebrate what I'm doing well and what's going well, and how might I learn and kind of show up differently and grow based on some of the data that I'm getting. And that takes some vulnerability, right? And this not this notion of, well, I'm the leader or I'm right, and this notion of vulnerability and willingness to kind of take input and to continue to be curious, I think is an important factor there. And I love.
I think you brought upon a sort of like a number 2 for us, self-awareness, and then maybe self-acceptance is what I'm hearing, which I would agree to. Actually, there is integration that needs to happen there in terms of, you know, who we are, and acceptance, a level of acceptance that we all have shadows and we have bright sides too, you know, and you try to do your best most of the time, but you're not going to be perfect. And the idea is not to be perfect, actually.
Yeah. And so the notions I kind of invited, what are some of the building blocks? Well, we're starting to get to them too, awareness and acceptance. And we talk about self-awareness, self-acceptance, but then what does that enable us to do, right? Accept other people, right? Less judgment, those kind of notions. And so for a second, I'd like to come back to where you invited us to in terms of the experience of virtuousness happens more in children. And our resident play expert, Ben, I'd like to get his perspective on that in terms of what are you seeing in terms of that? You talked about when people are outside the room and then they come in, it's a different experience. And I saw a connection there between what you were sharing and what Sesil just shared. So maybe kind of weigh in on that, Ben.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So, I mean, I think it's the the state of play, or like getting into that flow of creativity, whatever you kind of want to. I kind of think of play as creativity, and being free to kind of explore all different possibilities, and there's no right or wrong, and you're kind of open to lots of different ideas coming at you. And so when you're in that state, you're kind of, all your guards are down, and I think that's where all the filtering kind of goes away, like Sesil had mentioned. And I think another kind of interesting point, as you guys were sharing, was I was thinking about social media and how those three different pieces of what you think of yourself, what others think of you, and what you think others think of you. And I think social media kind of blends those, for better or worse, because you are putting out this image on social that may not be who you are, but it's who you want others to think of you as. And so now there's this, it's like this extra element that complicates things. And I think with kids or with play, all that kind of goes away. And so what I found in my kind of my monthly workshop series, which is more of like an enhanced networking experience, is that we, like, all those things kind of just like fall by the wayside, because we start with who we are as a person by just kind of sharing who we are through these different activities of building and play. And so and then maybe your work title or like your different work experiences will come in maybe 20 or 30 minutes into the experience. And then that actually enhances the, getting to know someone else versus leading with what you do. And then that kind of automatically gives you that perception of like, oh, like, insurance person, I already have an insurance person, I don't need to talk to you. But if you didn't know that they were an insurance person, and you talk to them and get to know them and their values and what they like and their hobbies, maybe you have something in common, and then that adds to the conversation down the road. So I think the getting back to the question about kids and play, I think it's just like getting rid of all those filters and like being, and it kind of goes back to being aware and also acceptance. I think it all kind of ties in with play, because when you're in that state, you're kind of aware of everything that's going on and all these different possibilities, and there's nothing that is kind of off limits, I guess.
So what came up for me was interesting, this dual notion of connection, right? So in this notion of play, right, we're completely connected to ourselves and our way of being, and we're not really worried about the outside, right? And yet that there's disconnection somewhat from outside, right? And it's just like you're totally into who you're being at that point. And so and you're able to show up that way. And I love what you talked about there in terms of the networking event. And if you lead with, oh, I'm an insurance person, or this is my name, rank, and serial number. So Ben, what do you do? And then name, rank, and serial number. It becomes a yes or no kind of, do I want to continue the conversation, instead of, so Ben, what brought you here? What excited you about the last speaker? Inviting just a generic conversation to get to know one another creates the space, or creates the conditions for, oh, now 20 minutes later, we have a conversation about what we do. Oh, I have a different perspective of you now. And I'm not just filtering based on name, rank, and serial number. And so I've had many conversations over the last past year in terms of inviting people to respond to so what do you do at networking events, and how to kind of craft that experience differently to get value from it. Because I think we all get tired of that, right? You feel, if you're on the receiving end, it's like, oh, I gotta give this answer to them, or it's instead of just being yourself, it kind of is a conditioned response. And so the thought about connection as part of virtuousness, because you're talking about children virtuousness, that's because they're just being, right? And I think there's a connection back to being, and then the relationships piece of it too, in terms of how we then connect with others. We first got to be connected to ourselves, and sort of self-accepting, self-aware, and then free to be ourselves. And then we're free then to connect with other people and accept them for who they are. And we invite that by our energy too. So there's this energetic element to it as well. So I love the notion of play, creativity, the childlike. It seems like everything comes back to childhood. It's like, couldn't we just like rewind and go back to childhood, take the 7-year-old version of ourselves, bring them forward and say, you remember this person? You know, but adulthood and life gets layered on top of that. And so this notion of virtuousness, what quashes, what are the things that get in the way of that? And how can we be more aware of those things and then bring more of this emotional intelligence and this other self-awareness work to people earlier in life? And what possibilities does that open up? Well, for me, it opens up the need then for teachers and parents and other adults to be self-aware. And so there's this ripple effect of good if we focus on maintaining the virtuousness, right? So we're saying that we're wanting more of that in leadership and role modeling. And we're saying, well, we've already got that in kids. So it's not really even recreating it or creating it, it's reconnecting to it. And then letting it flourish back to the
It's a
word.
lot about remembering. I actually believe that it's a lot about remembering. I'm not going to answer your question again, but I am going to add one more thing. So we said self-awareness, self-acceptance. I think there's maybe a third step around self-responsibility too, Brian, which would really benefit us a lot. But it's an automatic, because if you can accept yourself, you start to slowly accept others, or at least create a space for them to be. And hopefully that comes back as a notion of self-responsibility over time. But the idea would certainly be that. And I think we have a lot to learn inside our organizations around that. There's still so much discomfort around not knowing, not, making things right all the time. And it's okay to screw up. Like, it's okay to make a mistake and say, you know what, that was a mistake, but I learned from it, and I'm going to try to do my best even better next time, right? Like, so, because when we disown the behavior, not only we are going back to, step 2, so there's no self-acceptance because we are not integrating, we are disintegrating, but then we're role modeling that behavior for others too. So, yeah, anyway, I'm babbling, but again, I told you I wasn't going to answer your question.
It's all good. It's an evolving conversation, right? And so that's what I said, framework with flexibility, right?
Right.
But in doing that, you brought up this notion of self-responsibility. So it got me curious, what does that really mean, right? And so we can get into a little bit of what that means. And then we talk about this notion of failure, which is a big thing for organizations, people in general, our mindsets around that, right? Failure in terms of, what does that mean? Failure became, in terms of the conditioning, I was mostly in environments, it was a bad thing, right? Don't fail, you got to get it right. Bad to get it wrong, it's failure. And then again, it's sort of like the notion of how we're conditioned. Then we learn later in life that no, failure is a stepping stone to success. So what's happening in the middle there between virtuousness as a child, the not necessarily seeing that as much as we like as leaders, and then the same kind of thing. There's a relationship, I think, to how we start to see things like failure.
I would love to hear from Victor on this, but I'm just going to share what I observe. When I go into organizations, the leaders often have this sense that we can't do that, whatever it might be. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's large, but there's almost a guard that comes up very fast in conversations. And so one of the questions I often ask them, well, what would it look like if we were to give you permission? Right? So like, if you were to give yourself permission to do this, what could it look like? And try to have them sort of fill it out. And that sometimes shifts the conversation for us effectively. But Victor, I'm curious if you see that also, where people sort of, leaders say, this doesn't work for us, or I can't do that because that's not what people expect of me. Do you come into situations like that?
I feel like I see that more on organizations that are maybe in a highly regulated industry. I see that more there, and justifiably so. But even then, there's certain areas of the organization that could be a little more flexible with the no failure whatsoever type of thing. I mean, I have examples, like to a really simple example of the part of you brought something in my mind. about how do you respond to failure too, and what do people do after that? They adapt. So somebody was telling me something about cybersecurity, right? They were asking, well, what happens if somebody clicks on this link when you're doing a test of who's clicking on the fake link, right? And we're saying, look, we show it as an opportunity to learn. We don't punish them, because if you punish them, what they'll do is they won't report it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
When they click on the bad link, they'll be like thinking about it, and they'll wait. And the longer they wait, the harder it's going to be for IT to recuperate from that. So that's a simple example of, okay, your normal reaction, well, your reactive self would be punish them. But if you punish them, the next time the other person will be like, I'm not going to report it. I don't know what happened, so you got to be careful with that, right? So that you brought that to mind. So it's very important to attach even to procedure, our culture, right? Like we don't punish people. We show it as an opportunity to learn. That's a core value, right? That you can attach to a process. So to kind of like, I'm trying to answer your questions too, Brian, because I haven't answered.
No, you're all doing great. You're all doing great.
Yeah, I don't know what you have to say about that, Benjamin.
Not my conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point, Victor. It makes me think of the design field and my experience in just, so as an urban planner, if we were to develop a concept for a new, say, residential community, and we would go through multiple iterations just to try and get the right plan that would meet all the different requirements. If we were not communicating as a team, and then the concept we were completed with, like concept B or whatever, and it was missing certain requirements, that would be kind of considered like a failure. But if we were communicating as to what we needed in that concept and what it needed to show and how it needed to perform and function, then we're able to develop those concepts much more efficiently and productively. So I think that what's really interesting, and then the other piece of that is the manager or the leader in that situation allowing for the multiple iterations to actually take place, or are they of the mindset this has to be right the first time, or it's wrong? And I've worked with managers in both mindsets, and so I just find it really fascinating. But then you mentioned in IT the same sort of thing, in that we want to communicate and have them understand what they did, and have them share that feedback with us, so that we can iterate faster and make sure that they understand, this is the link that you don't want to click on, and here's why. And it's not right or wrong. It's just, this is what it is. And then the design field, that's very much what it should be. But often there's this layer of like right or wrong on top of it, which kind of hinders the creative process. And it's just kind of like this weird thing that I've like experienced. And it's just kind of like, it makes me, I think it goes back to the awareness and where the mindset of the leaders are, and what they're allowing their team to do as far as being creative or being empowered to try different things. And that kind of ties back into our full conversation. But I just thought that was really fascinating.
I love that you emphasize the leader, Benjamin. At least from my experience, guys, and I always go back to my experience in the Air Force, because that was my first adult experience. I was 20, right? So kind of like an adult, I guess. But it was such a great experience, because one of the things that I learned and I try to emulate later in my career was that the manager, the leader, they were true leaders, because they would tell us right away, as long as you're making an effort to get better, we'll protect you. If you make a mistake, the leader would say, I made a mistake, not you, because I take the blame for the group. Now, if I believe that you're not making an effort and basically that you're not an asset, then you might not get as much protection, right? Like if it's the religion of duty, is different than I was trying something new, right? So I learned that from my leaders, and after the Air Force, I always try to emulate that with my people, and they felt protected, right? Because I always used to tell them, when you mess up, like nobody's gonna know outside of this group, right? Outside of here, it was my fault. So, and I would tell them, because if I don't, and I was explaining to them why, right? If I don't do this, you're not going to trust me, right? Yeah. but I expect also the same kind of, you know, relationship. It's a back and forward too, right? I expect you to make an effort for me as well. And they usually did. And it was a simple, and that's a virtue, right? That's a value.
Mhm.
But they saw it in action. Because a lot of times I took a lot of flack for some people that they probably didn't deserve it, but they were my team, right? So
Yeah.
I got to take the heat. But if they don't see that, if I throw them under the bus, they're not going to trust me anymore, right?
Mhm.
They're going to do the bare minimum. So I'm not on top of them. You made a mistake. You made a mistake. So you made me think of that, Benjamin. So thank you for that.
Awesome. And so
Great.
you guys have gotten me thinking about now the notion of, you know, Victor, you talked about failure as an opportunity to learn versus, oh, if I don't do that, people are just gonna, if I don't give that, create that space, people are just gonna not report stuff. And so it's either we open them up, expansive, let them fail, let them learn, let them grow. Creativity, innovation comes from that, or I mute them. And they're like, oh no, I'm not going to get my head chopped off. Victor's going to chop my head off if I get this wrong. Benjamin's going to chop my head off. And so this notion of muting, I think that's part of the challenge right now is we mute people. And part of my journey is to unmute people, right? And to create the space. And there's a lot of interconnectivity here. So bear with me for a second. I think part of that is the conditioning of the 90-day cycle, right? Shareholder value. Oh, everything's focused on 90 days. And so if you're talking a year out, 2 years out, strategic plan, nobody wants to hear that. Development, personal development, nobody wants to hear that. Where's the ROI on that? And I say, look at the opportunity that offers, right? If you're allowing people to fail there, right? Learn, grow, give them cover, so that, because that's how we learn and grow. If you don't allow people to fail, which is a natural consequence of learning and trying, you're not going to, they're not only not going to say anything, they're not going to try, right? But you're going to cut off the inclination to try and bring innovation and creativity. And think about, you know, I talk about the work mask and the whole notion of people come in less than themselves because of the conditioning. We mute people because we need to there's this notion of perfection. We got to do it right the first time. I don't think I've done anything right the first time, or maybe not many things. And so, and I think most people, if they feel like it's not about getting it right or wrong, it's what can I learn, and how you choose to look at the process changes the dynamic. And if the leader exemplifies that to virtuousness and aspirational becoming and modeling, role modeling, and creates the space for it, creates the conditions for it, that's how individually, collectively, we create better with and for one another. And that's sort of like, this is the conversation we invite today, right? We started where we did, and look at where we got to. It was like, there's so much richness in just exploring where this might go based on all of your experiences and insights. Benjamin talks about design and urban planning and the value of kind of just the process there. It connected directly to what Victor's talking to, which it's like all interconnected with nuance, right? It all gets to mindset around stuff. Mindset around failure, it's not just simply in that space. There's so many things connected to it around being vulnerable, willingness to share ideas. And so a personal example with me is I often would get told I was too strategic. And so guess what that led to me doing? Not sharing my ideas because they didn't fit the mold, the construct, whatever. And so then I come to learn more about myself. I go through the strengths finder of my strengths. Guess where my strengths lie, right? And that's the thing too, is whenever someone I talk to, you know, people that tell me, oh, I'm to this, I'm to that. I get curious about that. I don't kind of like shy away from it because there's likely that's an element of where their brilliance lies. And what if we did that for everybody, right? What if part of virtuousness was seeing everybody for the unique human greatness and cultivating that by allowing failure and all the things we're talking about to provide a way to invite it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brian. You would love to know that the Latin term for virtuousness, where it starts virtue, actually means strength. Yeah, so you're dead on. I mean, you said everything that needs to be said, so I don't want to say anything else, but I thought that would be interesting for you to have.
It's very interesting. Thank you for that. In terms of, you talked about people and how they might view virtuousness. That's kind of a connection that might help people see it differently, and that it's supportive of all the things, the aspirations businesses have for being better, better retention, better leadership, better service to the customers, all those things. When we start to look at, appreciate, and create the conditions for people thriving through their strengths. Awesome. And so as we kind of wind down our conversation, I want to thank you all for where we went today. We never know where we go, but that's why there's only structure as the topic, sort of, and a frame of that. But really, it's bringing the different perspectives and inviting it from the people that will listen to and watch the conversation later to enrich and expand the conversation. Could have never imagined it went where we went, and there's more we could go to, and maybe we can expand on this topic in a future conversation. And so as we wind down the conversation, I ask you all to think of one thing you'd like to leave our listeners with, an invitation, something that you feel is important for them to take away, or that you've taken away, and then we'll kind of wind down the conversation. So I'll invite Sesil to start us off.
Oh God, okay. It's a difficult one. We said so much. I think I really want people to consider how they're being a role model, because we are. It's really not about where we sit or the title that we hold, or as Benjamin was saying, the profile we put on social media. It's really about who we are. And there is behavioral modeling that's associated to that. There is representational modeling, and there's inspirational modeling too. I think that's what I heard today. And I really wish that people would not try to be excellent all the time. And I say that for me more than anyone else, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm totally in this along with everyone else, but I think we're just fine the way we are. As long as we try our best and we have the right sort of intent in our hearts and in our minds, I think that's enough. That's usually what my mom says, just wish for just enough. And I like that. So.
Love that, Sesil. Thank you. Benjamin.
Gosh, I guess around play, I would say as a leader to kind of make room for creativity, and to empower your team members to kind of explore different ideas, and maybe that could be something as simple as going around the table and asking for ideas, and actively listening to those ideas and jotting them down, and showing that you care by listening to them and taking those ideas under advisement. Or maybe it's another way of in one-on-one talking with one of your team members, and kind of maybe kind of workshopping or brainstorming multiple ideas with them to kind of get them to kind of express their creativity. I think that a lot of people are so creative. Everyone is so creative, and if we're given the opportunity and the room to kind of share that with people, amazing things happen. And if we do that within our organizations, that's what every organization wants. They want creativity, they want innovation, they want growth, but they also kind of stifle that with the way that they kind of manage and create their environments. And so I think if we just do small things and let people kind of explore that, then they may be more willing to open up over time and give more.
Beautiful. Thank you, Benjamin. Victor.
I learned so many things. Thank you, Sesil and Benjamin. One of the things that I would say is that all of us are leaders. It doesn't matter the title that you have in your organization. So act accordingly. But also, I think, at least for me, in my experience, I enjoy so much developing other people. So if you're a leader, I think that's part of your job. Maybe that's not what you enjoy the most, but still be part of your job. And it's very important to be self-aware in order to lead others, to empower others, and do it in a way where they might overtake you in the company. That's fine. I mean, you do something good for the world, and they'll never forget you. So it's very important to me understand that part of being a leader is empowering others to be better, right? Be their better selves.
Thank you for that, Victor. Appreciate it. So many things to talk about. I'm going to come back to this notion of, so we invest in a training course, right? And we create this dynamic of flow and play, and people get energized and they kind of lose the person that walked in the door and kind of let themselves be free and be themselves. And there's great learning and growth that happens there. And then that becomes oftentimes it. That's the experience for the day. It doesn't become part of how we might create better in the organization. And so I would challenge leaders, the people that experience that, to go back and ask for how can we have more of that, not just in training, but in our everyday, and how can we, and be part of how can we create that? Because that's how we get to better, right? It's how do we notice how we make investments, and how do we notice, or do we even care about what the actual experience and takeaways were? Sometimes there's surveys, sometimes there's conversation about it, but what does it lead to in terms of an investment or ROI? We oftentimes get wrapped around ROI, but we don't practice getting to the next level of how this can help us create better. And so that's an invitation. And so the thing I would invite is curiosity, right? So I send my team to Benjamin's training or Victor's training or Sesil's training, and they have a great experience. Oh, how was it? Oh, great. Well, what is one thing we should bring back to our team? What's one thing we should continue to do as part of a team differently, and that's going to help us be better leaders, have a better relationship with our customers, whatever that aspirational thing is, virtuousness. Let's make that sort of like an expectation, is not just go through the time and the experience, but what are you going to bring back? Because if you're not bringing anything back, is there really an ROI? If there's nothing you're going to take away and then go apply, is there really an ROI? And so that would be my invitation to people. So thank you, Sesil, Victor, and Benjamin, for a wonderful conversation. Again, I invite everyone to watch the full episode when it comes out, enrich and extend the conversation with your experiences and your stories and your learning about virtuousness, role modeling, and leadership, and how to apply some of the things you've heard in this call to your own life, to your own leadership, to your own organizations, to help create better. And we invite you all to listen to the episode and to enrich and extend the conversation with your learning, your experience, and your stories, and to continue to create better where you are. And the invitation to all of us is to continue to create better for and with one another.